and in the echo of steel and concrete, where mockery used to bounce off the walls, there was something that sounded a lot like respect. They started with whispers, crude jokes about her curves. One of them said loud enough for her to hear, "Bet that wrench turner is hiding a whole bakery back there." She told them to stop, told them no, but they didn't like that. So they circled, laughed, and when she tried to walk away, they grabbed her, tried to tear off her pants in front of everyone. And when the fabric ripped and her lower back was exposed, they didn't laugh anymore. They froze because what they saw didn't just shut their mouths. It terrified them. Want to know what made 4 grown soldiers freeze in absolute fear and why those same men were on their knees begging for mercy minutes later? Then drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And hit subscribe because abuse doesn't end when it's exposed. It ends when it's punished, here on Graceful Valor Stories. The desert sun had no mercy that afternoon. Alpha range baked under brutal heat that turned metal tools into branding irons and made every breath feel like swallowing sand. The air shimmered with heat waves, and the smell was pure military. Hot brass, diesel exhaust, and that cocktail of sweat and machinery oil that clung to everything. Generators hummed constantly, punctuated by rifle fire from distant ranges. In the middle of all that controlled chaos, a woman worked without fanfare. Alina Torres didn't announce herself. She moved with quiet precision. Her gray t-shirt dark with perspiration, brown cargo trousers functional and worn. She knelt beside the scaffolding, trolling concrete around anchor bolts with economical movements. Her hands traced each connection like she was reading a language written in metal. No wasted motion. Just methodical competence from someone who understood that lives depended on getting details right. Most of the soldiers moving through the area barely noticed her. Another contractor fixing another piece of equipment that would break again next month. Background noise in the endless maintenance cycle that kept a military base functional. Under the shade canopy, 4 infantry recruits had made her their entertainment. "Tell me that woman doesn't know how to work," one said, nudging his buddy. "Look at that form when she bends over." The others laughed with ugly appreciation. "What do you think? Ex-military or fitness instructor who got lost?" Another one grinned. "Maybe she's just built for the job." You know what they say about contractor assigned for torque? They dissolved into laughter that had an edge to it. Alina didn't react. Didn't even glance in their direction. She adjusted her position, tested the concrete's consistency with practiced fingers, and moved 2 paces to the left to start the next section. Her knee brace, worn and functional rather than decorative, caught the light briefly as she settled into a new working stance. The man watching her most intently wasn't participating. Corporal Owen Locke stood with arms folded, jaw working like he was chewing on an idea. Late 20s with confidence that came from wearing chevrons but never being tested. His uniform was regulation perfect, but his eyes held the calculating look of someone searching for angles to exploit. He'd been having a rough month, failed his NCO course, passed over for promotion, looking for someone to take it out on. "You know what?" Locke said. "I think we should check what she's doing. Make sure she's following safety protocols." One of the privates glanced at him uncertainly. "She looks like she knows what she's doing." "Corp." "Appearances C." "And be deceiving," Locke replied, already starting to walk toward her. "And we've got a responsibility to ensure all non-military personnel are operating within established guidelines." The others followed, drawn by that magnetic pull of potential confrontation that young soldiers found irresistible. They spread out slightly as they approached, not quite surrounding her, but definitely establishing a presence that couldn't be ignored. Alina sensed the shift before she heard their footsteps. Something in the quality of the silence behind her changed, became focused and predatory. She glanced over her shoulder once, just long enough to catalog 4 men approaching with the kind of swagger that preceded trouble. She went back to her work, but her shoulders tightened almost imperceptibly. Her stance shifted, weight distributed differently, and when she traced a line in the dust with her boot, it curved like a hook instead of running straight. Small adjustments that most people would miss, but that spoke of training that went deeper than civilian contractor credentials. Because Alina Torres wasn't just someone who fixed infrastructure. Ever wonder what secrets lie beneath a contractor's uniform? Stay with us, the truth will shock you, here on Graceful Valor Stories. And the moment these soldiers decided to test her, they were going to learn exactly what that meant. The confrontation started with bureaucracy. Alina was adjusting the cable sleeve when Locke's shadow fell across her work. She'd flagged a kink twice already, the kind that would jam rounds and cause malfunctions. "I need to see your clearance documentation," Locke said, his tone carrying artificial authority. Alina straightened. "My clearance is current, 2 levels above what this requires. New security protocols require verification of all non-uniform personnel." She handed over her folder without comment. Official papers properly stamped with clearance codes that should have ended it immediately. Locke examined them like an expert. Says, infrastruct. Your assessment doesn't include electrical systems. Infrastructure includes all support systems. Has since the update 3 months ago. One private snickered. She knows the regs better than you, Corp. Locke wasn't backing down. Regulations updated again. New electromagnetic security protocols. Can't have unauthorized electronics near sensitive equipment. Need you to verify you're not carrying contraband devices. The duty sergeant looked up, frowning. Locke. What the hell? Routine security check, Sergeant. Such as, Alina asked. Phones, recording equipment, transmitters could be concealed in clothing. Full compliance check required. Conversations nearby dropped to murmurs. People had started noticing something was crossing a line. Strip search, upper body inspection. Standard procedure for uncleared personnel. That was a lie, and everyone knew it. But Lockhatch was banking on her not wanting to cause a scene. Another private pulled out his phone. "This might be worth recording." "Put that away," Rodriguez hissed. But the kid just grinned. Alina stood there for a long moment looking at this boy who thought he could humiliate her. She could have called for the sergeant, demanded his superior, walked away. Instead, she set the folder down and started unbuttoning her trousers. "Jesus, she's actually doing it," the kid whispered. She pulled them down to her knees and stood there, posture straight, expression unchanged. The soldier stared with ugly curiosity. "Satisfied?" she asked. Locke's grin widened. "Turn around. Full inspection." As Alina turned, the afternoon sun caught something on her lower back that made the atmosphere shift. It wasn't decorative ink. 5 stark horizontal marks ran parallel across her spine above her waistband. Each mark was different, precise, angular, like technical diagrams burned into skin. A gas mask silhouette, satellite coordinates, a syringe crossed with lightning bolts, a drone outline, and a skull wearing night vision goggles. Most watching didn't understand what they were looking at. The kid was still recording. Check out the back art. Probably got those near basic training. But Rodriguez felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen markings like that in his grandfather's photos. Unit identifiers for groups that didn't officially exist. That's when Sergeant Major Darius Hurley walked around the corner with 2 officers. The clipboard in his hand hit the concrete with a sharp crack that echoed across the work area. His escort officers looked at him in confusion, then followed his gaze to the woman standing half-dressed in the middle of their maintenance bay. "Sweet Mother of God," Hurley whispered. "Could this woman be more than they ever imagined? Keep watching. Her true identity will stun you here on Graceful Valor Stories." Because those marks weren't random. They were mission tallies from Ghost Vector operations. The kind of classified black ops that got buried so deep that even people with clearance weren't supposed to know they had happened. Each symbol represented a different type of operation. Chemical weapons disposal, satellite intelligence, biological threat neutralization, drone warfare development, and close quarters elimination. Hurley had been a master sergeant in Afghanistan, working intelligence coordination at Bagram. He'd seen the after-action reports before they were shredded, knew about the operations that went sideways and the operators who were supposed to be dead but somehow made it home with intelligence that prevented major disasters. He also knew that those operators had been given new identities and strict orders to disappear forever. Alina Torres wasn't just some contractor. She was a ghost made flesh. The kind of ghost that defense departments created when heroes needed to vanish for the good of national security. New identities, clean records, civilian jobs that utilized their skills while keeping them invisible. But Skin remembered what paperwork forgot. Locke was still grinning, still playing to his audience. "See anything you want to report, ma'am?" The kid was zooming in with his phone. "This is definitely going on social media." Alina began to turn back around, her movements unhurried, professional, like she was completing a task that had been assigned to her by someone with actual authority. That's when Hurley found his voice. "Stand down, Corporal." The words cut through the work area noise like a blade through silk. Every conversation stopped. Every tool went quiet. Even the distant sound of rifle fire seemed to pause in respect for the authority in that command. Locke spun around, his face cycling through several shades of pale as he realized who was watching. "Sir, just conducting a routine security inspection under new—" I said stand down. Hurley's voice carried the kind of authority that came from making life and death decisions in places where the wrong choice meant body bags and folded flags. He walked across the concrete with deliberate steps, his eyes never leaving Alina's face. The two officers with him, a captain and a lieutenant, hung back. They didn't understand what was happening, but they recognized the look on their sergeant major's face, the same expression he got when classified communications came in from higher headquarters. "Ma'am," Hurley said quietly, his tone completely different from the command voice he'd used on Locke. "You can get dressed." She nodded once and began pulling her trousers back up, zipping them with the same unhurried precision she'd use. To remove them. No embarrassment, no anger, no demand for apologies, just the quiet dignity of someone who'd endured worse things than public humiliation and survived them all. The kid was still holding his phone up. "Sir, should I send this footage to—" "You will delete that footage immediately, or I will have you court-martialed for recording classified personnel without authorization." "Classified? But she's just a contractor. Delete it now." The kid's hands shook as he fumbled with his phone. The video disappeared with a few taps, and he shoved the device back in his pocket like it was radioactive. When Alina was fully dressed again, Hurley stepped closer. Close enough that his next words were meant for her alone. "Ghost Vector was officially disbanded in 2013, he said softly. "Officially," Alina replied. "There are no service records for your operations." That was the point. Hurley studied her face, seeing things there that most people would miss. The way her eyes tracked movement without appearing to watch. The slight scarring on her knuckles that came from close quarters combat. The way she stood with her weight balanced, always ready to move in any direction. "You're not supposed to exist," he said. "Neither is half the equipment on this base, but here we are." That got his attention. Because she was right. Alpha Range housed experimental weapon systems and prototype technology that existed in budgets, but not in official inventories. Unless her clearance ran deeper than the paperwork showed, unless she was exactly who he thought she was, Hurley turned to face the assembled soldiers who were watching this exchange with the growing realization that they just stepped into something they didn't understand. Locke looked like he wanted to disappear into the concrete. The kid was pale as desert sand. Rodriguez kept glancing between her, Lay and Alina, like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "Everyone out," Hurley said. "Now." "Sir, we've got scheduled maintenance on—" Rodriguez started. "I don't care if you've got the Secretary of Defense scheduled for an oil change. Clear this area. Anyone who discusses what just happened will be washing dishes in the mess hall until their enlistment expires." The soldiers scattered like tumbleweeds in a hurricane. Locke tried to linger, tried to explain, tried to salvage something from the wreckage of his authority. "Sir, I was just following protocol. New security measures that came down from—" A Corporal Locke. Hurley's voice was quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying. Report to my office at 1500 hours. Bring your supervisor and your section leader. We're going to have a conversation about what protocol actually means. Locke's face went white. A meeting with the sergeant major with supervisors present usually meant paperwork that followed you for the rest of your military career. When the area was empty, except for the two of them and Hurley's officers, the sergeant major pulled out his phone and made a call to a number that wasn't in any directory. This is Hurley at Alpha Range. I need immediate verification on an Alina Torres. Contractor credentials background check priority Alpha. He listened for a moment, his expression growing more serious with each second. I see. And the classification level on her previous assignments. Understood. What about current operational status? Another pause. Copy that. And if someone had hypothetically compromised her cover identification? I understand. Thank you. He ended the call and looked at Alina, who had picked up her tools and was calmly inspecting the cable housing like nothing had happened. They tell me you've got clearance levels. I'm not authorized to ask about, he said. Then don't ask. But I can provide whatever support you need to complete your work. She looked up from her equipment. I just need to finish this repair and file my report, same as any other day. After what just happened, you want to keep working after what just happened? This job needs to get done right. And that Hurley realized told him everything he needed to know about who she really was. The captain stepped forward, confusion clear on his face. Sir, I don't understand what just... You don't need to understand, Captain. You just need to ensure Miss Torres has whatever resources she requires to complete her assignment and that no one interferes with her work again. For the next 3 hours, Alina worked with the kind of quiet competence that made experienced officers take notice. She didn't just repair equipment. She understood it on a level that went beyond technical manuals. Could identify stress points that wouldn't show up on diagnostic tests for another 1,000 hours of operation. Found design flaws that had been overlooked by teams of engineers. She worked like someone who'd maintained critical systems in conditions where failure meant people died. Had made repairs with improvised tools while under fire. Had signed off on equipment she'd have to trust with her own life, knowing that her approval was a promise written in her own blood. Word of what happened had started spreading through the base. In that way, military gossip always does quietly through maintenance crews and shift changes, each telling carrying a little more weight than the last. By the time Alina was halfway through her repairs, senior NCOs were finding excuses to walk through the work area. Master Sergeant Williams, who had been fixing military equipment since before most of the current unit was born, stopped by to watch her work on the target reset mechanism. He didn't say anything initially, just observed as she traced vibration patterns with her fingertips, feeling for irregularities that instruments might miss. Bearing race is wearing unevenly, she said without looking up. Probably been that way for weeks. Williams checked his maintenance logs on his tablet. Sure enough, operators had been reporting inconsistent target cycling during live fire exercises. Nothing serious enough to shut down training, but enough to make experienced shooters uncomfortable. How'd you spot that without running the system? Metal fatigue has a signature. You can feel it in the housing vibration. She moved to the electrical junction box, running her fingers along conduit connections with the practiced touch of someone who'd learned to find loose wires in complete darkness. Your power relay is running hot, too. Probably has been for months. Williams pulled up the electrical maintenance records. The relay had been flagged for replacement during the next scheduled overhaul, still weeks away. But the temperature readings showed it was degrading faster than predicted. We've been monitoring that situation. How'd you know? Thermal expansion. The housing metal contracts differently when the component is stressed. She guided his hand to a spot where the relay casing met the mounting bracket. Feel the difference in vibration frequency. It's working harder than the specifications call for. Williams had been maintaining military equipment for 3 decades. But he was learning things he'd never considered. This wasn't textbook knowledge. This was field experience earned in places where equipment failure meant people died. Hurley watched from a distance as she identified a hairline crack in a support bracket that the regular maintenance crew had missed, found a safety wire that was corroding and could cause hydraulic failure under stress, caught a mounting bolt that was loosening and would have led to catastrophe, fixed system failure during the next high-tempo exercise. Each discovery was logged methodically, professionally. No self-congratulation, no drama, just the quiet competence of someone who understood that other people's lives depended on getting every detail exactly right. When she finished, her report was thorough, professional, and contained 6 recommendations that would prevent equipment failures nobody else had even considered possible. Williams signed off as witness to her findings. His signature carried weight. 30 years of military maintenance, 4 combat deployments, a reputation for never approving anything that might fail when soldiers needed it most. "Ma'am," he said quietly as she packed up her tools. Outstanding work coming from Williams. That was high praise. The kind that got repeated in supervisors' meetings and remembered during performance evaluations. Hurley read her report twice, then looked at her with something approaching awe. "Where did you really serve?" he asked. "Places that don't exist on official maps," she replied. "Doing what kind of work? The kind that doesn't exist in field manuals." He nodded, understanding that some questions shouldn't be asked, even by people with clearance to ask them. The duty sergeant approached with a work completion form. "Ma'am, if you could sign off on the inspection." Alina took the pen and signed her name with the same precise handwriting she'd used on the entry log. But the sergeant noticed something else. The way she held the pen, the small scar on her trigger finger, the calluses that came from handling weapons and precision tools under extreme conditions. He'd seen marks like that before on the hands of special operations personnel who worked on equipment that didn't officially exist. "Thank you, ma'am," he said quietly. "Professional work." As Alina shouldered her tool bag, Hurley made another call, this one to his commanding officer, explaining that the contractor in question had been cleared for unrestricted base access and that any personnel who'd shown her disrespect would be receiving additional training on proper treatment of classified personnel. When she was ready to leave, he walked her to the work area exit. "You don't have to come back here," he said. "I can ensure you get assignments that don't involve dealing with soldiers who don't know any better." Alina shouldered her tool bag and looked back at the area where she'd been humiliated, stripped, and mocked by men young enough to be her children. "I'll be back next week for the follow-up inspection," she said. "Why?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the training areas where young soldiers were learning to trust their lives to equipment maintained by people they'd never meet. "Because those kids need to understand that the quiet ones have stories too. And sometimes those stories matter more than the loud ones." She walked out into the desert heat, her footsteps steady on the concrete pathway. Behind her, the work area returned to its normal rhythms of maintenance and preparation. But something fundamental had shifted in that space, something that would ripple through conversations and attitudes for months to come. At 1500 hours, Corporal Locke stood outside Sergeant Major Hurley's office, his dress uniform perfect, but his hands trembling slightly. His supervisor, Staff Sergeant Mills, waited beside him with the kind of expression that said this conversation wasn't going to end well for anyone involved. "Remember," Mills said quietly, "tell the truth. Don't try to justify what happened." The door opened. Hurley's aide gestured them in. The meeting lasted 25 minutes. When Lockhatch emerged, his face was pale and his career trajectory had changed significantly. Extra duty for 8 weeks, mandatory training on treatment of personnel with classified backgrounds, a letter of reprimand in his permanent file, and a recommendation that he spend considerable time thinking about what leadership actually meant. But the real consequences were already spreading through the base like ripples in a pond. By evening chow, every crew chief and maintenance supervisor had heard some version of what happened at Alpha Range. The story varied in details, but the core remained consistent. A contractor had been humiliated by junior personnel, and that contractor turned out to be someone whose service record was classified at levels most people couldn't even imagine. Master Sergeant Williams found Lockhatch in the enlisted club that night, staring into a beer he wasn't drinking. "Mind if I sit?" Lockhatch shrugged. William settled into the chair across from him. You understand what you did today, son? Everyone keeps asking me that question, because everyone wants to make sure you learn from it. That woman you embarrassed, she's the kind of person this whole base exists to support. The kind who does the jobs that let the rest of us sleep safely at night. Locke looked up. How do you know that? 30 years in this business, you learned to recognize certain indicators. The way she handled her tools, the way she found problems we'd missed completely, the way she carried herself when you tried to break her down. Williams paused, but mostly it was the way Sergeant Major Hurley reacted. I've never seen him look like that before. Locke was quiet for a moment. What should I have done differently? Asked questions before making assumptions. Treated her with the respect you'd want if you were in her position. Remembered that the uniform is supposed to mean something beyond just authority over other people. Rodriguez found Locke later standing at a window overlooking the training areas where the night shift was preparing equipment for tomorrow's exercises. You know what you did today, right? Rodriguez said quietly. Everyone's been explaining it to me. Good. Because my grandfather served in Vietnam, worked military intelligence. He told me about people like her, the ones who did the jobs that never happened in places we never were against threats we never officially faced. Rodriguez paused, watching the maintenance crews work under the floodlights. He said you could always identify them. The way they moved, the way they observed everything without seeming to watch, the way they carried themselves like they'd been through hell and found their way back. Locke said nothing. You humiliated a war hero today. Someone who probably saved more lives than you'll ever know about. And you did it because you thought she looked vulnerable. How was I supposed to know? That's exactly the point. You don't know who you're dealing with until you take the time to find out. And by then it might be too late to make a different first impression. The desert wind caught the edge of Alina's shirt as she reached the base gate, lifting it just enough to reveal the top edge of those mission tallies. The guard who processed her departure was a senior sergeant, 25 years in service, who'd seen enough classified operations to recognize certain kinds of marks when he saw them. He didn't ask questions, just nodded respectfully and handed back her credentials. Have a good evening, ma'am. You too, Sergeant. 3 weeks later, when the next civilian contractor showed up for equipment maintenance, the atmosphere at Alpha Range was different. The crew was professional, courteous, helpful. They asked about qualifications instead of making assumptions, offered assistance instead of creating obstacles because word had spread through the base in that way important lessons do. Through shift briefings and maintenance meetings, through NCO discussions and casual conversations over coffee. Not the gossip version of what happened, but the principle behind it. Treat people with respect until they prove they don't deserve it. Ask questions before making judgments. Remember that you never know who you're dealing with until it's too late to change your approach. Master Sergeant Williams made it part of his orientation program for new personnel. Not the specific incident that stayed at Alpha Range, but the concept behind it. The understanding that quiet competence deserved recognition, that humility often masked experience, and that the military worked best when people took care of each other instead of looking for people to push around. Sergeant Major Hurley kept Alina's maintenance report on his desk for months afterward, not because it was unusual, though her recommendations had prevented 3 potential equipment failures, but because it represented something he wanted his people to remember. Excellence didn't announce itself with fanfare. It just showed up, did the necessary work, and left things better than it found them. And somewhere in the civilian world, Alina Torres continued her quiet mission. Her service remained classified, her sacrifices unrecognized by the public, her stories untold in any official record. But she'd left behind a training facility full of people who would never again assume that silence meant weakness or that someone working alone was someone they could safely ignore. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who don't need to tell you how dangerous they are. Sometimes the real heroes, are the ones who never get recognition ceremonies. And sometimes when you think you know exactly who you're dealing with, you discover you don't know anything at all. Have you ever seen someone completely underestimated because they chose to stay quiet instead of making noise? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one and respond to as many as we can. If this story reminded you of someone who never got the credit they deserved, hit that like button and subscribe for daily stories about the heroes hiding in plain sight. And if you know someone who's ever been mocked, dismissed, or ignored simply because they didn't fit someone else's expectations, send this video to them, because what happened at Alpha Range didn't go viral, didn't make headlines, didn't become a social media sensation, but it changed everything for the people who witnessed it. Your next story is already waiting for you. Just click on the screen. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, with another story about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. And thanks for remembering that respect is earned through character, not volume, here on Graceful Valor Stories.